Yeah.
Bruchem Aboim Shem Irgen Shiritar. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov as Mishlit on issur Titgodedו halacha, doing different than the Tzibur. Rabbi Yakov is sponsoring a shir called Irgen Shiritar 718-851-8651. Email ist@shivanet.com. Today's shir is Mukdash Nishmas Rabbi Mori, Rabbi Kapos Mishkovai, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, Rabbi Shalom, Rabbi Smith.
Okay. The subject of today, doing different than the minhag of the Tzibur, in a certain sense is a new shaila, because for years many Yidden lived in small shtetl, and each had their rav and their paisik and their bezdin, and it was very easy to follow your minhag and everything. But today we live in a world that on one block you could have 5 different shuls, and you could have daven yourself in different shuls. And the question is, when is a person mechuyev to change his minhag, to conform with minhagim? This is a bein hazmanim shaila, the bachim going from yeshiva and they're ending up in shuls that have different minhagim. Or we see today parents go to children, and typically with the child davens, the son davens in a yeshiva, and they daven nusach svar, then how do you work that out, different minhagim? And of course we'll discuss the very serious question of tefillin and hamoed, where most I think don't wear tefillin today, some do. And what do you do when you have a place that is different than your minhag? So the emphasis in Parshas Re'eh, in beginning of Perek Yudalid, the pasuk says, "Banim atem l'Hashem alekeichem," you are children of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Lo yitgudedו, don't cut your skin. V'yisimu karchem beineinechem lameis. Both are expressing one's sorrow when he loses a loved one. And as Rashi says, and it's also we find it in Parshas Chodesh, the same concept, that the goyim, the Oivdei Avodah Zarah, out of grief, would tear into their skin to express their pain. So here the Torah Kodesh is telling us, but a Yid, you can't do that. Banam atam Hashem alekeichem, you're not allowed to do that. And this is 2 different lavim that we find in the Chinuch and Tav Samach Zayin and Tav Samach Ches. One is the issur of gedida, of tearing in one's skin, and one is simu karchem beineinechem lameis, is the issur of tearing out one's hair. These are 2 different lavim in this pasuk. Of course, we should add the beautiful hemshech. I saw the Dasikenim and the Ebenezer, and many other Rishonim say the same shot, that a person all of a sudden is nifta and he leaves his children with young yisayimim. So the Torah is saying, "Banam atem l'Hashem alekeichem." They might have lost their gashmiyatik father, but you have a tata in Himmel. And you should know, as he says, "Yeshtechem of shuchai b'kayim," and don't worry. So the hemshech reads very beautifully. I once saw a beautiful letter from Rabbi Nissan Eibshitz. He writes to his sister-in-law. Apparently his brother-in-law was nifta young and was left with a number of yisayimim. So he says, "You lost your father basav adam, but you got the aviyah yisayimim." And then he writes, "Anuroyin bebira ba'olam." He says he saw him with his own experience. When there's a young yisayimim left, they grow and they're matzliach more than anybody else, because they have their tatan himmel that became their father. So we see 2 lavim, both there's malchus based on this pasuk. But then we have a Gemara in Yevamos Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis that seems to learn a totally different shot in the very same words. Zog the Gemara. Gemara is a question. We just had the Yom Tov of Purim, and as we know, on Purim there are different days to lay in the Megillah. We can lay in Yud Aleph, Adar, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Dalet, and Tezvav. Frag the Gemara, how could that be? Ikri kan loisis goydu loisasu agudas agudas. How could you have such a scenario? Some lay in the Megillah Tezvav, some lay in Yud Dalet, the Bnei Kfarim lay on different days depending on the year. Frag the Gemara, how could that be? You have different groupings for the same mitzvah. In other words, it's not talking about tearing one's skin when he loses a relative. It's talking about doing mitzvahs in a different way. And Rashi says key words, and I should mention the Ritva, the Rosh, and the Meiri say the same shot. The Nira Kenayhagen Shtei Teiros. There's only one Yom Tiv, and there's only one Rebbeinu Shalom. How could you have a different date to learn the Megillah? So it's Nira Shtei Teiros when you have different days to learn the Megillah. Frag the Gemara, so then what about the pasuk Lois is going to do? What about the issur of Gedida? So the Gemara says it's a lot of extra letters in the word. Lois is going to do. It could have said Lois is going to do. Why sis going to do double saf and double dalit? So you know both of them. That's what the Gemara says. Now, what's interesting is the pashtus of this Gemara would be that not only tearing in one's skin is a lav d'oraisa, but if a person does it different than the minig, when they're agudais, which is our sugya, it's also the raisa. How do I know? Because Mar asked a question. Lav lois is going to do mi boile legedida legufei. How could you say lois is going to do is a lav? Agudais I need it for the issur of tearing one's skin. So had it been only an asmachta, a remez, then what's the kasha? The ikka is don't make a gedida, and agudais is a milsa the musa. So based on this, the Bejana Rav, the Das Torah and Tav Sa'ad, the Gim of the Steichemen is a beautiful discussion. Amarechas Lamed Klal Ayin Test, Mamshik and Zeif HaMitzvahs, Pri Megadim, Mil Tzedakah, almost all the places where Moshe Feinstein and Chelik Dal Lamed Dalet, the Tzivnei Megdava, all say that this issur of Leisasu Agudais, having different minhagim, is the same daraisa like tearing into one's skin. I know that Chodesh and others hold only the Rabbanan, but I could say probably Roiv Paiskim hold that there are two issurei Torah in this word. Like it's going to do, like the Gemara says. Now the question is, loit this new pshat. So what's the hemshech of the pasuk? What's Bonam Atem Hashem Lekechem lois is going to do? Zok the mitzvah very pashut. If you realize you are brothers because Bonam Atem Hashem Lekechem, so it's inappropriate to have agudas. You have to live ba'achtus. The Netziv says this in his Pirush and Chumash. If you want to more the Haibin of Shat, the Maral and Gur Aryeh on this pasuk, he says that when you have different minhagim by the Teitzah, by a Yid, that's a bad reflection on the Makor. And the way he puts it in his Maral type of sprach, if there's a chiluk by Yidin, then that's chas v'shalom, an expression of chiluk by the Rebbeinu, which can't be. But be that as it may, I think the main yisoid is, like the pasuk says in the end of the Torah in Parshas Habracha, Vayi b'shur and melech b'sasev rashayam yachat shifti Yisrael. So Rashi quotes a sefri. When is the Rebbeinu Shalom our Malkeinu? When we are yachat shifti Yisrael, v'loi kishiyesh machloikis beineihem. And it's mavaldik. Rashi quotes a sefri. If you look up the sefri says kishem asuyim aguda achas, then the Rebbeinu Shalom is our melech. V'loi kishem asuyin agudais. Now that's probably based very similar on the Gemara in Yevamis. The shenkite of Yidden of the Rebbeinu Shalom of Bonam Lamokim is when we are aguda achas and not chalila agudais. So that's definitely the simple reading of the pasuk. Like the issur of lois is going to do. Before you apply this lamaisa, I must tell you a Rambam. The Rambam Hilchas Avodah Zarah, Perikut Beis Halacha Yudal. You're wondering why is the Rambam, why is halacha in Hilchas Avodah Zarah? Teretz is because the issur of Gedida and Srita is Avodah Zarah. So who adin this halacha? So the Rambam says Bichlal Azara Zu. Besides the issur of making a Gedida al Ameis, that is an issur if zeh noye keminig zeh v'zeh noye keminig achar shedav zeh goyim l'machloikis gedolos, and that's also shenema lois is going to do. The Rambam is not learning like Rashi and the Ritva and the Rosh and the Meiri that lois is going to do is al t'nira k'shtei toiris. The Rambam is learning lois is going to do is also al t'chashash machloikis. And this is something that's very easy to understand when someone comes into our shul and does something different than us. Like, I don't care about you, that causes machlaikis. Okay, I don't believe they're going to start fighting, there's going to be a civil war, but it's resentment. It's a certain period of avos. Why don't you have More covered at Tzibur. Why are you doing your thing in our place? And you look in the Rambam's Tshuvas in Peradar Kuf Nun Aleph, when he speaks about Sas Agudas Agudais, he says, "Leisiya b'nei machlokes b'shum davar sheba'olam, va'atem chachamim unavaynim v'yoidim mahu oynish hamachlokes v'kama rois garmos." We know the Churban Abayis came out because of machlokes as in Eschinam. And you look at the Netziv in his Akdama to the hamoed Dov on Chumash, he says they were tzaddikim and chasidim and hamolei Torah, but they couldn't be soivel someone had a different minhag than theirs. That was the source of the Churban. They looked down at them. And when someone comes into a shul and does like does different than the minhag hamakom, that brings out a terrible period of avos. So according to this, it's very pasha to hemshech. We all know a father's greatest nachas is when his children get along, and the father's greatest sorrow when the children fight. So the reading is very simple. We're all brothers. So Leish is going to do. Don't make achtos because it's a terrible tsar for the Rebbeinu Shleilim. So we have basically the issur of Leish is going to do. It's an issur deraisa most paiskim, and we have two svaras why. Rashi holds nira kashtei Torahs, the Ram holds alts machloikis. Now let me give you one mashal that brings out the point, and also we'll do a little more explaining we have to do. Let's say there's a tzibur that nobody wears tefillin and hamoed. Okay, in walks a yid, and he takes out his talis and tefillin and puts on his tefillin and a 5 ton gan tefillin, and he wears tefillin. Now, what's wrong with that? Two problems. Number one, that's mamish making it to stay tyrus. I mean, is there a mitzvah tefillin or not? You know, we'll soon see minhagim, no nicht gefährlich, but either yeah or nicht. So that obviously shows that making two tyrus. And also it causes a certain resentment. You know, we hold that we don't wear tefillin, and you're making us feel guilty that you wear tefillin. Why? Like we're kaflei manach tefillin. Like what are you doing? Why don't you go to your own shul? Now, here I must add, the Gemara in Yevamis, same sugya but this the Daf Yudalit, Gemara says Rava holds when is the leisis going to do? When is there an issur deraisa of different minhagim? When there's one city and one bezdin, a small little shtetl, and they all have the same minhag. I mean, today, Kamat, you don't have that. Maybe Square is a good mashal. It's a big city, but a big city with one minhag. So then, coming into the city and doing your own thing is an issur deraisa. No doubt about it. Someone walks into Square and puts on tefillin and hamoed, probably an issur deraisa, like the pashtus. But let's say it's shtei batadinim b'bir echad. Let's say you have a city, and there are a few different kehilos, 2 or more. There's no leisis guy to do. Now, what's pshat? Torah says that's the yoifi of Torah. The Bereshit gave us a Torah and gave it to us to figure out. Nahari upashtes up the Gemara in Chulin daf yud ches elu ve'elu divrei lekim chayim. We know the Gemara in Shabbos daf peches meis kefatesh yefoitzik sela. Torah is given an ayin panum Torah. This is the shein kind of Torah that a person has to follow his rav and his bezdin. And I always like to illustrate this. The same sugi in Yevamis, the Gemara quotes the Gemara from Shabbos. In Sech the Shabbos of Kuf Lamed. There it's a Mishnah, famous in the Perik of Les the Mila. Rabbi Eliezer holds not only is Mila doicha Shabbos, you're allowed to make a Mila on Shabbos, but even machshirei Mila, if you don't have a izmol, you're allowed to cut wood, to make a fire, to smelt the metal, to make a izmol. Most Tanoim hold that's a banavayt Chol Shabbos. Only Milas Eicha Shabbos, not Machshirin. So what was the psak? So the Gemara Mishnah says, in the Rabbi Eliezer city, they did Chilul Shabbos for Machshirei Mila. So it was a davar nifla. A baby's 8 days old. In some cities, it's a mitzvah deraisa, the greatest mitzvah Mila. And in some cities, to make Mila is Chilul Shabbos deraisa b'vahesya. Who's right? They're both right. Who's wrong? The one that looks down at the other minhag. Because the Gemara sanctions following your bezdin. So when you have one city or one kehila, we'll soon see, which is like a city, and they follow their minhag, so it's not a stira. You could have an hour neighbor, the one shul is wearing tefillin and hamoed, and next door the shul doesn't wear. That's no problem. But coming into the other's territory and doing different than the minhag, that's leisis guy to do, because you have to find your own place. So this is why we understand the side of leisis guy to do. Now let me give you one more mashal, and I think we should have enough clarity for the sugya. Let's say the shul's minhag is that today they don't say tachnun, it's the Rebbe's yard site. Okay. In walks someone, goes, what do you mean? Tachnun, I'm not giving up tachnun, and he makes a very pronounced tachnun b'fnei am v'eda. Was he over on the issur deraisa of leisis goydadu? Not likely. I mean, it's wrong, but it's not leisis goydadu. Why? Because the fundamental difference between tefillin on Chol hamoed and tachnun. Tefillin on Chol hamoed is a question of chiyav deraisa, kakaftei manach tefillin or not. Tachnun, as great and heilig as tachnun is, the koyach of tachnun is awesome, but tachnun is only a minhag. So there can't be niruk shtei toiris if it's not a deraisa, if it's not an issur. If it's a minhag, it can't be niruk shtei toiris. And that's not my chiddush. That's the Gemara in Yevamos with Gimel and Beis. With the Gemara asked the kasha from a certain minhag that they had different minhagim. So I'm talking about leisis goydadu because there's an issur. And you're saying by a minhag, the Gemara seems to say by a minhag, there's no leisis goydadu. And the svar is pashut. If it's not, it can't be niruk shtei toiris if it's only a minhag. Now I say only a minhag, a minhag is heilig, but it can't be niruk shtei toiris by a minhag. And that's why lamaisa, we paskin, by a minhag there's no leisis goydadu. But here's the question. That's good according to Rashi, that the reason is niruk shtei toiris. According to the Rambam, that the issur is machloikis. So when you say tachnun and they're not saying, that's definitely causes resentment. And if you said that, baruch shekivanta, because that's one of the major nafkaminas between Rashi and the Rambam. Like the Rambam, even by a minhag is leisis goydadu, if there's a kapeda. But like Rashi, there's no leisis goydadu. In fact, the Rambam's lashon is zeh noig b'minhag hazeh, b'zeh noig minhag hazeh. So the Rambam has, in a certain sense, a bigger issur, even by minhag, there is leisis goydadu. Now there are other nafkaminas. Obviously, one simple nafkamina would be when if the tzibur doesn't mind, they have a sign, we're trying to improve our membership. Come in, do what you want. They don't mind. You want to wear tefillin, you don't want tefillin, do what you want. So if it's only al sekapeda, al severity, then taka maybe it's mutter. But if it's never shtei toiris, so it's not up to you to be moichel on the toiris covet. Or another nafkamina, simple nafkamina, would be when someone does something with sinner. So there's no problem of machlokes because no one sees. But maybe it's niruk shtei toiris. What are you doing? I mean, is there one halacha, two halachas? But one thing I want to tell you. Let's say you know you're Einikol of Rashi ben Achaben, okay? And can you come into a city and do what you want? If it's only a minhag, can you keep your own minhagim in the shul? Because Rashi holds that there's no leisis goydadu, only by a deraisa. So it can't be for two reasons. First of all, there's a Mishnah that says differently. The Mishnah in Pesachim Daf Nun, a big insight for today, that there's different minhagim regarding malacha on Erev Pesach, Lamashal, and other minhagim. So the Gemara says, when you in your own city, do your thing. You go to someone else's city, follow their minhag. Va'al yishana adam b'nei machlekes. This is an issur d'Rabbanan. We call al yishana. There's leisis goydadu and al yishana. Al yishana means don't change. The lashon of the mechaben tov samaches siv dalid, when you come to a different city, don't do different la'olam al yishana adam b'nei machlekes. Now this is something that a person has to have seichel to understand, but it's basic Yiddishkeit. You don't do different than the minhag hamakom. More above Metzia that peivav mebeis la'olam al yishana adam and aminig, because Moshe went to Shemayim and he acted like a malach. Malachim came down to Avraham Avinu and they act like people. We know the famous Derech Eretz Rabbi and Zut, they both soon see the lashon, but also says don't sit when they're standing and don't cry when they're laughing. Klali shel davar al yishana miminig habriyos. There's a mavel dik maril in the minhagim. It's al mitchilam bates in our prince. The maril warns, don't change from minig hamakom b'shum inyan afilu b'nigunim. And he writes about himself, but they have uvda. He once was a Rashatz, and he had a good reason to change the minhag hamakom, and his daughter was nift on Yom Kippur, which was when he changed the last year, and he was toilet that he was punished because he changed the minhag hamakom. And this is about a minhag of a nigun. But a person has to have seichel. There's a certain hachno, you have to have a certain kvoid that tzibur. You don't change. So Rashi doesn't argue on a Mishnah Pesachim. why Rashi says there's no license guy to do, because it's not near Kishtei Teiros. True. Both are true. There's no issur deraisa of license guy to do by a minhag. But there's still the din ha-mishnah, there's still the issur derabanan of Ayishan me machlekes. Now how do I know that? First let's push it. And also Rashi, when Rashi says on a minhag there's no license guy to do, Rashi says miyu ba'asrei de machmir. Same Rashi in Yevamos Yudim Beis. Al Yishana as dagmei machlekes. So Rashi, when he says there's no license guy to do, Rashi is quick to add, but don't forget, I also agree to a Mishnah that there's an issur of Darban Al Yishana Mei Machlekes. So now we have, I think, a beautiful picture of Al Sugya. All agree there's an issur deraisa of license guy to do. All agree you can't change a minhag hamakayim. The difference is according to Rambam it's a deraisa, according to Rashi it's Darbanan, and all agree that's klal yishol dava. Don't change from minhag hamakayim. Now the emphasis is understandable, like I told you. It's a certain defiance. You come and you want to do your thing. It's nice. Stay in your own shul. It's a little bit of a gaiva. It's a little bit of a, an American mentality of, in your face, I'll do what I want. Today is the yeshiva shul, 5, or I'll stolz them out. All these narrative concepts don't justify doing wrong. And basically, some people, they're very makbid at their minhag. It's very nice. But I think many people, it's my minhag with the dagish is under the word my, not minhag so much. And if I do it, it's holy and no one else counts. But that's wrong. You come into a city, you want to do your minhag, fine, go to your shul. There's plenty of shuls that have your minhag. But when there's 2 batei dinim and a erachas, there's no leis guy to do, each does their thing. Let's move on now to apply this lemaisa. The emphasis, the questions are endless, but we'll try to do the main shilas. We'll go in order of Shulchan Aruch, and hopefully minei u'minei tistayim milsa. So lemaisa, let's start with, we'll go in order of Shulchan Aruch. I think the first blatant shinui minhag is in many shuls, the minhag is that only a married person wears a talis, but we know Svardim and some German kilas, even a young bacha wears a talis. So let's say the minhag is not to wear a talis, and no one but one bach is wearing a talis. Is there any problem with that? So let me tell you, there's no chashash of leisis gaidu for sure not. Because there's no issa if you don't wear a talis gadol, because you're wearing a talis cotton. It's not a question of shtei teiros, it's a question of a minhag. Now, the problem is, okay, don't change the minhag hamakom. But this is clear. We saw that according to the Rambam, and certainly according to the Mishnah, if you are certain that the tzibur doesn't mind, it's acceptable. You want to wear a talis, you don't want to wear a talis, that's not important enough to make a fuss. So since the Maisa, the Mitzias is that no one has a problem with that, there's no chashash machlekes. So not only is no deraisa of leisis goy to do, because it's not a question of an issa, because we're wearing talis cotton, but there's no chashash machlekes. So like the Rambam, there's no problem, and like Shulchan Aruch, there's no problem. Now, I did see an interesting makar. The Darkei Chaim V'Shalom, the mechitza in his city, and this is in the sefer Tzitzis in his sefer Oislam B'Zayin. He says although he had talmidim that came from Germany and wore a talis, he wasn't moichem. So a real Hasidic shtetl, they had bachim wearing talisim. He wasn't makbid. Now the Maisa, I did a bigger chiddush perhaps. The Buchach and Eichel Avram in Siman Yud Ches, he says it's not a problem leisis guy to do when someone wears talis and tefillin to mincha. Now that's already a little bit of a strange minute because no one else does it. But he explains why. But certainly I think by Shachris, for a bacha to wear a talis when the minhag is not a breach in Al Yishan. Le'idach gisa, I should mention, by those shuls, those keel, especially in the heights, where the minhag is strictly every boy wears a talis, and they pretty much makla in the minhag. There's a whole box of talisim in the back of the shul. There's a gabbai goes around and is mechabed you wear a talis if you don't have one. And like a Pam told me, for them it's like almost like it's not kvaydat tzibur and kvaydat tefillah. So if they're makbid, so you have to wear a talis. You don't wear a talis? No problem. Go to a stibul and don't wear a talis. But you can't come into that mechitza and change. But we do see that basically on a regular basis wearing a talis from mechitza that there's no talis shouldn't be a problem. If someone decides that he davens in a place that he wear a talis to change his minhag and wear a talis minhag mechitza, no problem. That we just said. And if you look at minhagim Maril in issur and ois yud, interesting, the Maril struggles like Bemis, all the Paisim struggle. Why should a bacha not wear a talis gadol? What's the difference? So some Samariel is the one that says that because of the asmachta. It says kiyikach isha next to the pasuk dilam taslucha. In that same Ariel, who's the makar of the minig, not to wear talis gadol, his Talmud wrote to him that he changed his minig to conform with minig hamoed, and he wore a talis even though his minig was not to. The Ariel didn't comment, didn't protest. There it's not a stira. We feel Bacham don't wear a talis, but if you changed, go to a tzibur that's wearing a talis, you have no choice but to change and do the minig. See, because everybody's minig is al yishana adamei machlekes. That's the bottom line. Okay. The next question, in a certain sense, is much more challenging, and that is the major question of tefillin davening tam. Now, typically today, almost all shuls have mixed yer davening tam, nar davening tam. But let's say you have a situation that this shul they don't wear davening tam tefillin, like the minhag hagra, and one person wants to. So you have to realize that's a serious question, because it's not a question of a minhag. Rabbeinu Tam held that Rashi's tefillin is possible and vice versa. It reminds me, they came to the Chazon Ish that they said a sefer, they just printed a sefer, and it writes there that if you don't wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, you're a kaflei monach tefillin. We can't let that go. So Chazon Ish chuckled and said, Rabbeinu Tam also said that. What do you want from that sefer? It's a machlokes of yes or no. And that's why Lamaisa, the place can discuss, maybe it's Leisa's guy to do. You're coming into a shul, no one wears a Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, and you wear a Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. The Ma'il Tzedakah, in Tshuvas, the end of Simon Mem Tes, he says maybe the hat is because it's not nikah. No one sees you wearing tefillin. But today there's a big tefillin baitul or Rabbeinu Tam, and on the boxes there's Rabbeinu Tam. It's hard to believe it's not nikah today. But I did see the Buchacha in Simon Lamadal Siv Gimel. He says Taka there is Leisa's guy to do, and maybe that's why the Shulchan Aruch and Simon Lamadal at Siv Gimel writes that only a muchzik and mefursam b'chashivas is allowed to wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. Because when he does it, people say, oh, he knows what he's doing. No one thinks differently. But he's taka concerned about Leisa's guy to do. But the emes of the minhag today is no one's concerned, and I think I understand why. The emes is amol, people follow the Shulchan Aruch, that only a muchzik and mefursam b'chashivas. For a person to wear it would be mechzik yuara. But today, it's almost like sort of a minhag. Your father did it, your grandfather did it. Today, no one even thinks about, is he taka yoyer? Is he taka someone so choshev? It's almost like, like the Mizman Megillah. You basically, why is it a Leisa's guy to do? Because that's the halacha. Each city does a different day. It's almost like Eretz Yisrael, they take lulav, midaraisa, all 7 days, not chutz la'aretz. That's what halacha is. So maybe there's no Leisa's guy to do, because halacha is, if you're a muchzik and mefursam b'chasidus, gesundheit. If you're not, don't. So it's not that there's something, you're wrong or I'm wrong. I'm muchzik and you're not muchzik. And that's why you'll see something interesting. That today, where it's not going with that, no one looks at muchzik and mefursam, there shouldn't be a problem. Because lamaisi, at the end of the day, each person is doing what they have a Kabbalah. I saw the Marash Halevi, the Behetim and Simon Lamadal Tivkot Vav quotes as Marash Halevi, that if someone comes into a place and no one's wearing a bit of tam tefillin, and he wears a bit of tam tefillin, that's mechzik yuara. Now, why did he say Leisa's guy to do? There's his pasha. Because that's his minig, and not that you're doing wrong, you're right, and he's right. So it's no longer Leisa's guy to do. Lamaisa the Maril, in a tshuva, in Kuf Lamed Zayin, he does seem to say, if someone wears a bit of tam tefillin for Shmoin Esrei of Shachris, I think he seems to say, if you wear Bein Tam during Shmoin Esrei, that might be Leisa's guy to do, because that no one does. You want to be different? Oh, that's a problem. Lamaisa, it seems pretty clear that today you do what your minig is, and it's not totally in machlokes, ma'ar mechada, v'loi pligi, this is muchzik, and this is, he holds himself not muchzik, whatever the svar is, and it's fine. What is much more challenging, and many tools were written, was the question about tefillin and hamoed. And you have to realize it's a serious question. There are more rights, like the Rosh, to wear tefillin and hamoed with a bracha. V'chein yesh kilas shanei hakinkein. I think most kilas Ashkenaz wear tefillin and hamoed without a bracha. The Goyin Taka didn't wear tefillin, but I think most Ashkenazi kilas wear without a bracha, some with a bracha. And then, probably today, probably Roiv Klal Yisrael, because you have Chassidim and Sfardim and Gronics, don't wear tefillin b'chlal. Now, again, it's not a question of extra credit. It's a question, is there a chiyuv deraisa, like the Rosh, you have to make a bracha, or is it wrong? Now, what's interesting, what makes it a little more challenging, the Beis Yosef writes that the minhag of Sfardim was always to wear tefillin, and Grad Chassidim also. When did it change? When they found the Zoya says, if someone wears tefillin and hamoed, is chayiv misa. Now, I wear tefillin and hamoed, I'm afraid to say this, but that's what the Zoya says. So when the Sfarish Poskim saw that, and the Chassidish Poskim saw that, so they stopped wearing tefillin. So Lamaisa, here the problem is that it's not a question of a minhag. It's a question of a mitzvah, of a chiyuv deraisa. And that's, you can understand why many of Gedolei HaPoskim, Asher Mepiyim Anu Chayim, write emphatically, you shouldn't have in one shul some wearing and some not. The Tzibur in the end of Simon Lamed Aleph quotes from the Malbim Arz Chaim on this Simon, who says, he quotes Svarim, not to have a mixed minyan, because either is a chiyuv tefillin and hamoed or not. Make up your mind. There are Chashochin and Lamed Aleph Dal, the Kitzur Shulchan and Simon Yud Siv Chaf Hey. And what I found interesting, the Bach HaChadosh, the Tshuvas HaBach in Simon Mem Beis, it's an unbelievable tshuva. They had grievances on the chazan, the shots, and one of them is this mechitza, he didn't wear tefillin in a place when they did wear tefillin, and so Ivan Leis is going to do. So you have Mishnah or Chashochan, Kitzur Shulchan, the Ma'aser Rav of the Gra also was in Simon Kufayin Dal, although he didn't wear tefillin hamoed, but he told his Talmud that if you come to a place that they don't wear, if they do wear, you have to wear, but wear it a little off, so you're not yoytze the mitzvah. That was the days. We'll soon get to that. But the point I think has to be made, and I saw this as Zichron Yehuda, Simon Tezvav, he was the Rav in Satmar a long time ago. He says it's kedai whenever possible to avoid davening in a place that's different from your minhag, because it's like some poskim, it's an issur deraisa, what is going to do? It might be an issur deraisa, it's not a joke. We're talking about, again, the Archashochan, Mishnah Berurah, Kitzur Shulchan, Klal Yisrael's poskim for Doris, they consider Leisis guy to do. Now, but Lamaisa, we do see very often mixed minyanim. So, an easy of the two shilas is when someone is not wearing, when the minhag of the tzibur is to wear. He walks into an Ashkenazi shul, and they're all wearing, and he's not wearing. So here we see, as early as the Rambam Panu is quoted in the Stei Chemed and Klal Ayin Tes, that maybe it's not nicker that he's changing the minhag, because maybe Punkt has a stomach ache, he doesn't have a gufnaki, maybe he lost his tefillin, such cheshbainis. Now Lamaisa, the cheshbon that he doesn't have a gufnaki doesn't seem to make sense, because if his guf is not naki, how is that a daven shmein esrei? That's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, you have to have a gufnaki. Levushei Mordechai and Tinyana Kuf Chav Gimel, the Chuashai and Tav Peiches have other cheshbainis, maybe this, maybe that, maybe he lost it, maybe he's getting it, maybe he didn't put it on, he took it. Lamaisa, he's not doing something that you could say, oh, look, he's wrong, maybe he'll put it on a few minutes. So a little bit far-fetched it is, but Lamaisa, we have one svar. There's another svar the poskim say, that Lamaisa, for him to wear tefillin is chayiv misa. Does he have to jeopardize his life to wear tefillin when they're not wearing when the olim is wearing tefillin? Now all these things are good, but you have a different choice. Why come here? Go to the next minyan. You can't wait 15 minutes till the next minyan. There they do it. Don't wear tefillin like your minhag. Lamaisa, there is another svara. The fact that even the manichei tefillin don't make a bracha is a raya that they're also not so convinced. So we're both not so convinced. Some say that as well. There's a Chuvas Chai Aryeh that says this for Lamaisa, the Mishnah Berurah, Kitzur Shulchan, or Chashochan are concerned about it, but at the same time, the Malbim and Mishnah Berurah quotes his lashon ein nachain. It's not right. He doesn't say a stronger lashon. Maybe taka. There's what to be saimach on, not to wear tefillin when the olam is wearing tefillin. But what's more problematic when the tzibur is not wearing tefillin, and in he comes with his tefillin. There's nothing you say but that he's changing minhag hamakah. And maybe there's a resentment. You know, what are you telling us that we're kakavtei manach tefillin? Like, what are you doing here? So, as I told you, the Goyin Ma'aser Rav told his Talmud His Talmud grabbed wore tefillin, but he put a mechitza in between his head and the tefillin, and he put this on top of the sleeve. So the guy laughed, and the guy said, "You don't have to do that. Put it a little bit off enough that it's possible." Now this is a problem practically because your tefillin is going to be off. Someone's going to come along not knowing why you're doing that and straighten it out. So you're going to push it back. So that's also nikah. Now what I saw chiddush nifla, the masvach halamachlis, if cotton yud beis. He says one of the gedolim would wear tefillin and hamoed like the minhagim, but he took out the parshas before Yom Tov. So I saw the sefira-related chelik vav simanei. He says some people had interesting minhagim. That's not our minhag, but he quotes the miachzet the Maram Ash, the Talmud of the Chemseifa. So lemaisa, it's interesting. My point only is that gedolim went to lengths not to change the minhagim. Imagine wearing tefillin for 4 days, empty parshas. I hope they don't forget to put it back after Yom Tov. You know, the next time Mechap is in Sukkot, when you take out the parshas, it's out already. But my point is, Gedolim went through great lengths not to change minig hamoed. Now someone asked me a good question. He said, how about if I wear tefillin, like the minig, and I have a mind not to be yoitza? So the Maisa, he's not yoitza the mitzvah, kavan afucha. But I saw the Minchas Allah and Zois Chaim V'Shalom says, could be still a bezoyin for the tefillin. See, the word it's a bezoyin for the Yom Tov, for the tefillin, both of them, but you have two ice. So maybe even kavan afucha might not help. But I did see some say that it's. But basically, the real problem, and we have this often, is when you have a minyan mitzumtzum, and there's no choice but to either join or disband the minyan, no minyan. So the emphasis, had it been an issur deraisa of lois is going to do, certainly an issur deraisa, so there's no eitzah. You can't do an aveira to do a mitzvah, so don't daven to the tzibur, or go get in a car and drive to a different neighborhood. But you can't do an issur for a mitzvah. The issur hashayla, as I told you, in Taf Peiches, he's mekel, a tzirav of other svaras. Okay. Now, what we see recent, and I should add to this, the more in Brachas that Mem Zayin says, Rabbi Eliezer was Meshachar Avdoi, to make a minyan. Lo'el mem tavoidu, but tefillah b'tzibur is very choshev. So maybe that's what the Seimach on. But one thing I saw, I think in recent years, that the shul, let's say, does not wear tefillin, but they have, they put up a mechitza, or those that wear tefillin go on the Esas Noshim, and they daven there with their tefillin. And after Shemanes, when they take off their tefillin, they join with the Tzibur. Now, that's a little interesting eitzah, because if you hold that being behind the mechitza is considered tefillah b'tzibur, which you like to agree to, so manashach, if you're tefillah b'tzibur, then you're davening with them. But the emes can make a chilik. You're part of the minyan because royin elu aseilu. But the fact that you show an achna, you show a bittul, you say, I understand you, you're doing right, but I have my minig. I'll make like two different batei dinim. But I know there are many shuls that have that minig. Now, sometimes they will daven a whole minyan with tefillin, but very often there's no minyan of menichet tefillin. So this seems to be a good eitz. Now, here the question again, when it comes to it, when there's no minyan unless you join with someone else. So this is hard for me to say, but again, the fact that the Mishnah and Kitzur Shulchan Aruch or Chashulchan all condemn the minig, it certainly should be avoided hatefilah, and one should go to great lengths not to join. If there's mamish no other choice, no, we did see Makila. Rav Moshe in Chelik Dal, Hey Simon Chav Daled, Sivkan Vav is Mekel a little bit. He says the lashon Lo Nochain indicates it's not really an issa. The Marshag in Chelik Beis, Simon Yud Beis says very mechudesh dikasvaris. Maybe only if he paskins to someone else his lace is going to do. But he's taka mekel. He says by the Ram Shik they were mekel also. The Divrei Yatziv in Archaim Simon Yud, there's a bunch of chuvas, and the Ois Chaim in Simon Lamed Aleph. And it's interesting, one of the main problems with asering it muchlat is by the Sanzer of the Divrei Chaim, the meaning of course like by Chassidim not to wear tefillin and Chol hamoed, but Bachram until 18 years old did wear tefillin. Because he said it's Kabbalah and Bachram not into Kabbalah. Other reasons, whatever he gave. But what did he do? And it seems they have a Kabbalah that the Bacham daven with the Tzibur. Are you mixing? So the Chaim struggles with that, and other pais can discuss this. But again, we would love to avoid this problem. We have a big enough city, we can have minhagim tefillin minyan and non-minhagim tefillin minyan. But if it comes to it, maybe taka you could be soymach lahakol. Now this is clearly after we try very hard not to come to that matzah. This is regarding the question of tefillin on Chol hamoed. Becomes a little more of an issue when a menichei tefillin goes to Eretz Yisrael for Yom Tov. And of course he's there on Chol hamoed. So the emes is, it's interesting, but the minig Eretz Yisrael across the board is not to wear tefillin on Chol hamoed. Why? The mitzvah is ba'aretz. So Rav Moshe in Chelik Dalid, Simon Kufay, Siv Cotton, Hey, and Taka the Mechitza is Chaim to the same cheshbon. That the reason is simple, because the original miyastim of the Yishurim Eretz Yisrael were, of course, the Sfardim that always never wore tefillin, the Talmidei Agra, Talmidei Baal Shem Tov, the Talmidim of the Chabad, and they were miyasid the minig in Eretz Yisrael, and they all happened to be those that subscribed to the minig not to wear tefillin on Chol hamoed. So that's why it's nothing to do with Eretz Yisrael per se. It's a din in minig hamakom, because the miyastim did not wear tefillin on Chol hamoed. Rav Moshe in the same tshuva says, but today could be the minig has changed, because there's so many chutz la'aretz that come to Eretz Yisrael. In fact, I heard from someone that heard from Shlomo Zalman that he himself wore tefillin on Chol hamoed b'tzina, because he was officially from Ashkenaz, and even though he was living in Eretz Yisrael, they say Rabbi Zalman Meltzer also wore tefillin on Chol hamoed b'tzina, because he came from Europe and he did wear tefillin. Okay, but l'maisa, those that go to Eretz Yisrael could wear tefillin on Chol hamoed b'tzina, and as they daven taka without tefillin, because tefillin b'tziba, and then when they get to their home or hotel, wherever they're staying, then they put on tefillin either before davening or after davening. Now the question is, can you make a menichei tefillin minyan in Eretz Yisrael? I'm sure there are enough people for that also. So here I saw in the Sefer Yam Tasheni Kachasai in Amar Kuf Beis quotes both Rabbi Shlomo Zalman and Rabbi Yashiv that that's wrong, and the cheshbon is really pashut. The emphasis, you learn Hilchos Yom Tov Sheni, you'll see that even making a minyan in Eretz Yisrael for chutz la'aretz on Yom Tov Sheni is wrong, because it's a zilzul into minhag Eretz Yisrael, and most poskim hold you can't do that. Daven whatever you could with the tzibur, and that's it. The minig of having a minyan for bnei chutz la'aretz in Eretz Yisrael Yom Tov Sheni is based on Afkas Roichel, the Beis Yosef's Tshuva Sefer and Simon Chavav that sanctioned the minig. Why? Obviously, because in Eretz Yisrael there are many bnei chutz la'aretz, but how many menichei tefillin people are there in Eretz Yisrael that come from chutz la'aretz? So they both say that's going too far. And it's the whole minig of chutz of Yom Tov Sheni minig is a chiddush, but don't extend that even to menichei tefillin. Now that was written again probably 40 years ago. Maybe today it's different. I haven't made a survey, but the point is a minig like this that is in Gans Eretz Yisrael is definitely more chosh than a regular minig. Now regarding the question of changing from nusach of the Tzibur, so there are many changes. Basically, the Meishav Dova and Yud Zayin, the B'chat B'chaim, Chavdal, the Mamshik and Mem Gimel, they all say, which is pashut, that it can't be an issur deraisa of what is going to do, because nusach hatefilah in the most is a minig, so there's no leisis going to do. The problem is the Rachashash al Yishan Mei Machlaikis, or like the Rambam, is there a leisis going to the deraisa? And that depends how you do it. When someone comes in, let's say they're davening Svar, he davens Ashkenaz. Okay? So if he davens, whatever he davens, different quietly, very nice. But if he says, Melech Mul Batish B'achais out loud, and then Hoydel Hashem Kiruv V'Shmai, he's broadcasting that I'm doing different than you. That's wrong. That's Aisha Mei Machlaikis. Now, there are some shtibels, some shtiblach, a minyan factory, whatever you want to call them. It's basically do what you want, and it's basically a free-for-all, so there's no kpeda. But if there's a distinct minig, so Moshe says this in Chelik Beis, Kuf Dalet, and the other two places in Chelik Beis, that whatever you do quietly, so it's fine. But to go broadcasting that you're different than the minig, that's wrong. Moshe even said maybe you shouldn't even quietly daven, because you might daven out loud. I think the minig oilam is whatever you could keep b'tzina, you're allowed to keep your minig. Of course, a shatz has to keep the minig hamakom and everything, because he's doing things for the tzibur. In fact, Moshe holds even the stilish Shmoneh Esrei, he should daven like the minig hamakom, not like his minig, because he has to get practice to be able to change suddenly to the nusach of the tzibur. Now, most places can say, as long as you could change it, because you have a siddur, so you can do the shtil like your nusach, and the Shmoneh Esrei kiminig hatzibur. Now, when you get to Tachnun, so again there's a change. Nusach Svard says Shamli Gimamidis, Nusach Svard, Nusach Ashkenaz says Tachnun right away. So Moshe says, you have to do the minhag hatzibur. Now, don't be afraid. The Shamli Bagadnu, hopefully it won't be Mechzik Keshikra. The person has a little averis here and there. But to do different, let's say B'hurachum on Monday and Thursday is a different order. So whatever is nikah, you have to keep the minhag hamoed. I'll tell you an interesting question of Leisis going to do by a nusach. The Yushalmi in the first page in Masechta Tainis, stuff Aleph Amar Aleph, says that the reason why the minhag Yisrael is to change to Mashruach by Musaf, not Ma'ariv the night before, because many people don't come to Ma'ariv at night, and if you can have some start and some don't, it'll be Leisis going to do. That's the way the Pnei Moshe and the Korban Eidah explained the Yushalmi. It's only nusach hatefilah. Teretz says it's not a nusach hatefilah. It's the integral words that's ma'akib the Shmei Nesher even with the Eved. Oh, that's never kashtei Tyrus. When's the right time to say it? So that's the exception to the case. There's a across the board question of standing versus sitting, and I'll give you 3 examples, but the halacha is the same for all 3. There are different minhagim regarding sitting by Kaddish, by Chodesh Hashatz, and by laning. So I'm not saying exactly, but be'erech minhag Sfardim, achenu Sfardim, is to sit by them all. Minhag Ashkenazim is to stand by them all. Kaddish, Chodesh Hashatz, Kriyas HaTorah. Okay, the Gra and the Arizal sat by laning, but basically that's the different minhagim. And the emphasis is there's a virtue to each minhag. If I were to ask you what's more of a covet, standing or sitting, so it's pashut. Standing is more covered. That's why we stand for Shmei Nesher. So standing is more covered. Great. If I were to ask you when is there more kavana, when you stand and daven or sit or daven? Sit. How do you know? It's a Farish Gemara. Toises and Brachas and Alpha and Beis says why does the Gemara insist that you have to sit by benching? So Tais explains, this is an Alpha and Beis, because since benching is the only bracha deraisa, they were machmet to make you sit so you have more kavana. And the truth is, most people, when they sit, they're more meyushiv, I guess, pun intended, but they're more settled. So it's really, each has a mila. So what do I do, let's say, when I go to a minhag of Sfardim, and they're all sitting for laning, or Chodesh Hashatz, or Kaddish? So the answer is, you follow Das Torah, the Derech Eretz Rabbah Perek Zayin, Leisia Oimed Bein Yishurim, V'lo Yishuv Bein Oimdim, and he has other examples. Don't do different at Tziba. Klali Shel Davam Al Yishana Adam Daite Midas Chaverav Ubnei Adam. Mamish, this example. If everybody is sitting, don't stand. You're looking very different. You're almost defying them when you're doing different than them. If you want to daven your nusach quietly, fine. But this is clearly doing different than a minhag. My minhag is because of chshivos. Now your minhag is al yishana me'amachloikis. The only thing is, today, because we have a mixture, you could have a magid shir. I know a magid shir, but it gives in a Sfarashi yeshiva. And they said, you could stand for Chodesh Hashatz, we don't mind. You could stand for Kaddish. No, if they don't mind, so there's no lack of Kvayat Tzibur. And there's no Leisis guy to do, because in the most, it's only a minhag. The Chidah in the Tshuvas Toiv Ai and Siman Yud Aleph, he has it based on a Gemara Megillah, interesting Gemara Megillah, where Rab didn't fall Tachnun Kiminig HaMakom because he felt he had to fall entirely. I don't do different than Tzibur. So he says if you have a good reason to be different, then maybe you're allowed to. So if someone's an older person, everybody's standing in yeshiva and he can't stand, so his old age is meichiach why he's doing different. But basically, menschlichkeit is if everybody is sitting, you sit. Everybody's standing, stand. Now sometimes you have a few people doing differently, no, then you could join them. But you shouldn't be the only one that's doing different than the tzibah either way. More chashiv than the minhag is al yishan adam mea machlaikis. Question: when the tzibah is skipping tachnun because it's a rebbe's yahrzeit l'mashal, and you don't want to give up the tachnun, and the truth is, I don't blame you. Tachnun is an extremely powerful tefillah, probably one of the most powerful tefillahs of our davening. Don't forget the Gemara in Bab Metzia and Tes, the story about Rabbi Eliezer who was put in chayrim, and he was very upset about it. And one day he said tachnun, and right away Rabbi Leil, who put him in chayrim, was nifta. Tachnun has an enormous power. So the Maisa, you don't want to give up your tachnun. So there's always a simple eitzah. Stay in the yeshiva, or stay where you daven, and daven with tachten. And once there Pam Shaila, so he told me something I'll never forget. He says, look at the Chasam Sofer in the end of Parsh Va'era, incredible Chasam Sofer. The pasuk says that Pari told Moshe, go shecht your karbonos. So Moshe says, Lo nochin lasis kain, nizbach es toyavas Mitzrayim leinein v'lo yiskaluni. You think we're going to shecht the karbonos? They're going to stone us, because the karbonos were there avoid the Zorah. So for the Chasam Sofer, Moshe was scared. He didn't have betach in the Bershman. He was scared of the Mitzrayim. They're going to stone him. Moshe had the upper hand at that point. What's the problem? So Zok Chasam Sofer davar nifla moed. Ein ro ulonu mitzad hamusa. Twice use Allah. It's not ethical. It's not proper. We're going to shecht it, and they can't do anything because we have the upper hand. But they're going to grin their teeth. They're going to have to control themselves. They're going to be bubbling and bursting inside, but they can't express it. Do you think we're not yashras to mention? You think that we're going to do let's loy nachain? How dare you? You're chayshid us for lacking yashras. Play. Rapam said, when you come to someone's shul and you say tachna on the Rebbe's yard side, you're guilty of this pasuk. They're going to want to throw you out, but maybe they will. But if they don't, it's only because they don't want to be throw you out. So again, it's more than the psak. It's the understanding. You want to do your minhag? Wonderful. Do your thing in your own shul, or maybe go on the side, go into a different room. If there's an arakayda, you could fall tachning is untehid. But again, it's the attitude. It's the Torah attitude. Question which comes up either in a shul or in a hotel where people are eating together on Pesach, and I have my minhag and you don't. Can I do my minhag in front of you? Is that changing minhag hamoed? So the emphasis is Pesach. All the poskim say is different. Pesach is the Yom Tov of Chumras. The Tzibur writes, "L'chumras anoshim ein kates." In fact, the Shulchan Aruch and Taf Mem Beis Sivav, even scratching the walls is based on a Yishalmi, even though there's no chametz on the walls. What's the pshat? So you look at the Kaf HaChaim in Taf Nun Gimel Sif Katan Mem, and again in Taf Samach Zayin Sif Katan Ayin Beis, he says there's no license going to do by minhagim Pesach. Why? Because Pesach, it's like a free-for-all. Everybody does what they want in Chumras. So it's not a bad reflection on someone else. It's not a deraisa. And that the emphasis, although we do find, it's interesting, I should add, in Yeridei Kuf Yud Beis Sif Katan Tezvav, and also Arachayim Kuf Samach Hey, that if you're eating with someone that's not machmer on a certain chumrah, you should eat like his kula, because the chashash of eva and machlokes. But that's different, because there it's a regular day. So if you're firmer than me, I might resent that. But here, Pesach, everybody has their family minhagim. Some mish, some don't eat knubbel, and some don't eat for dried fruits, and the minhagim are endless. So Pesach is a little exempt from the issur of Ayishana or Lois is going to do. Pesach has a different child. Rav Moshe and Chelik Beis Simon Tzadik Dalet was asked that a person's davening Leilei Pesach in a shul that they say Hallel and he doesn't. So he wants to walk out. So Moshe says, I'll do that. That's Ayishana of Mei Machlokes. He said the minhag of saying Hallel is not only the minhag of European Yiddishkeit, it's the minhag of the Gra. It's based on the Masechta Seifrim, on a Yishalmi. And Moshe says that it's also to walk out. You have to say Hallel. Now, if you don't want to make a bracha, so you don't have to make a bracha. It's not nicker. He said, if it would be nicker, you're not making a bracha like you're a shatz, then you have to say a bracha also. Not a bracha of Atola. If it's based on Masechta Seifrim and a Yishalmi, and the Gra did it, you can't say it's a bracha of Atola. And he brings it right from more Psachim Ayim Sham. And why do I say that? Because something that's much more common, you have very often a lot of people, not only Bnei Eretz Yisrael, the Sfardim and Groniks, have the minhag that by Ma'ariv, on a regular weeknight, they don't say the Baruch Hashem La'olam, Yireinu. So, good, don't say it, fine, wonderful. But they're a Shliach Tzibur, and all of a sudden it's quiet, they say Yisgal's God Shmei Rabbah, and they don't end off that bracha. So besides an obvious Shini Minhag Hamoed, they're depriving us of an Amen. You got to say Amen. So I once saw someone that was a Chacham, he had someone from the Tzibur saying the bracha out loud. But no one said Amen because they didn't put two and two together. And then he started saying Kaddish. So this Rabbi Moshe would apply. Say Yireinu with the bracha. It's not a bracha of Atola. I saw other poskim that say this. The Birkei Yosef in Simon Reish Lam above quotes the Rishon, the Orchos Chaim that says this, the B'Seil HaChochma in Dal Chafei Moshe in Yeridei Gimel Tzadik Vav. So this is something that is a blatant minhag hamakom, and it's also robbing us of an amen. So the minhag is to do minhag hamakom, and it's zichanat bracha levatol. The sefira days is interesting that there are different minhagim regarding when to keep the minhagi avelus during the sefira. The Ramah says, and I quote, Tov Tzad Gimel Siv Gimel, V'lo yinhagu be'ir achas miktzas minigzeh u miktzas minigzeh mishum loises goydedu. Now, to my very limited knowledge, I can't say I know what I'm talking about, but to my knowledge, this is the only place in Shulchan Aruch that we see the words loises goydedu. This Ramah. And the pliya is that the minhagei sefira are minhagim. If there's no lois goydedu by minig, why does the Ramah call it a loises goydedu? It's only a minhag. Don't forget, it's not a din HaGemara, the minhagi avelus. So you look in the Magen Avram, see if cotton above, he makes it very matter-of-factly. By a minhag, there's no loises goy to do. By a minhag shel issur, there is loises goy to do. I think it means to say very pashut. By a minhag of nusach, it's understood, it's only a minhag. I mean, only. It's a halakha minhag, but it's only a minhag. The avelus, no one knows it's only a minhag Yisrael, it's not a din HaGemara. To us, it's an issur. It's a minhag shel issur. And it gives the very bad impression of Nirakash Day Tyrus. But be that as it may, there's no doubt about it that the minhag of sefira, we can't have two people doing different minhagim in the same city with the same bezdin. But as you could understand, the minhag in Brooklyn, there are countless kehilos, so today there is no minhag. I should mention a little bit Sarachim. When I was growing up, until probably 20 years ago, there was chasans until Chodesh Iyar, and that was it until Yemei Agbola. Recent years, it's starting to increase more and more. This chasan is till Chodesh Iyar, and then after Lag Baima until Shavuos. Now, which minhag do we hold? The Magen Avram says you could. The Ramah says you could do either minhag, but you can't tansavei the chasan literally and do both. So Lamaisa, I don't know what happened. It changed. Someone said the minhag in America is like the second minhag, the first minhag. So that needs l'tzarachim, but that's not my problem. What I would add is that minhagei sefira is a minhag shel issur. Now, why do I stress that? Because I'm zayich to go to a camp. We have a few hundred b'nei Torah. We've got a very diverse group. We have over 90 different yeshivas coming together for the summer. But it's almost all Ashkenazim. And we had this once where a Sfara Shabacha who shaved Erev Shabbos Chazoin. Because the minhag of Sfardim is that when do the minhagei avelus begin? So that was taka wrong. Because the emphasis is, well, they ask you which is more chama, minhagei sefira avelus or minhagei avelus in the Yemei Hamatzarim? V'am pshutim. Avelus, the Yemei Hamatzarim is dinim mishnayos, gemaras, Shulchan Aruch. So that would be a problem of loises goy to do. And especially it was very, very nikkel. Halicha shleima and Yemei Hamatzarim, Yudalet Vav, and Yechavadas, Dal Ram Vav, say a chiddush to me, that Lamai, since we all know that there are Sfardim and Ashkenazim, there's no loises goy to do. Now that's true, we all know, but in this kehila, it's mamash a kehila, a few hundred b'nei Torah, it should be a problem. There's a chisi love and what the chilik is. Now they Sfardim had another issue, but they solved it on their own. For the first trip, it's called, we have probably 10, or usually around 10 or more Sfardim, and Shavasa B'tam is the minhag of Sfardim, but every time they put on talis and tefillin to mincha. See, Tisha B'Av, we all wear talis and tefillin to mincha, but the other days they wear by mincha, and they davened in the back, behind the mechitza, but that they understood that would be a problem. The Tzibur and Tafresh Samach Aleph writes, if you in Sefkat and Chaf, regarding the different minhagim regarding the seder of this Leil Sheni of Sukkos. If you say Shechiona first or Leishav Sukkah first, the second night, he says don't have in one sukkah people doing different minhagim. That might be loises goy to do. Maybe he's concerned about a minhag shel issur. But today, they used to have a lot of community sukkahs and kehilish sukkahs, but today it's only a question of a family, and that's not a problem. I'll tell you two more interesting, let's go to do shaylas. The Mishnah Sukkah Lamed Zayin to the Rabbi Kiva noticed that Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua did different than the Tzibur regarding Anuim. So the B'Shana Rav and Das Torah, the Divrei Yosef, our Chashulchan say, what about loises goy to do? There it is, Anuim is only a minhag, and there's no loises goy to do, how you do Anuim. And Achrein Chaviv, the Torah in Siman Tov Reish Chav Daled, quotes his father that says that there were those that kept 2 days Yom Kippur al Tzveika de Yoima, and my father was Moicha. Why is father Moicha? Tzaddik Gomer. Zok the Beis Yosef, als Leises Goydadu. Not in Shechanach, but it's in the Beis Yosef, because to have something as crucial as Yom Kippur, to have different minhagim, that would be Leises Goydadu. But the ikki is, we should be Yachad, Shif the Yisrael, Guten Tov, Tzibur.
Shem irgendwie terakt die biggest character of Smith Tracy with Tracy the Mishmas of Mary Rabbi Isaac from Stamazalman of so many Kaparas Mishkova to have the great schools expansion issur. Call irgendwie Torah 718-851-8651 email ist@yeshivanet.com. Und eine meiner Kasche muss ich bogen die Sache ist Israel für Himmel und Mitzvahs. Nimm mal eine Hoffnung man sieht Jagdul Tayriade. Gadol is Gadol Shmei Rabba. Kom we gaan maar goed weer van elkaar machine. Daar ik er met heilig deze zo maar Gadol naar Gadol maar Shmei Rabba. Allah maar we staan zelfs met de brief. Maar dan gaan we gaan zo serieus dus was er een maas er meer mee allemaal we namen. Ali zo Rabban maar van dem ook al mee zo met al kolman dus we reizen we gaan zo dem brief was sa je dan nog gaan maar beginnen te vragen. Hallo man, we smaken jaren, we mogen Eerst we mogen smaken, gaan we dan ook al eens over mogen. We zullen maar weer zo alleen ook al eens over mogen. Okay, Rabbi said even though some people stay for the Sikkim, some people leave, it's not Leish's guy to do. So, Sikkim of the Shir and Leish's guy to do.
Just as what we learned today. First of all, we see the importance of Yachad Shifti Yisrael, that's for sure. There's a lav diaraisa, l'chol hadayis of Leisis Goydadu. When it applies, of course, is the sugi of today, but all agree to lav diaraisa. The only machlekes is the issur because of Nirikish Day Tyrus like Rashi and the other Rishonim, or is like the Rambam. But there's definitely the diaraisa of Leisis Goydadu, and you see the beautiful hemshech in the pasuk. There's an independent issur derabanan, even when there's not Leisis Goydadu, even when it's only a minig, there's still an issur derabanan. Ayishana adam me machlekes, which is a din derabanan. I forgot to mention, it's in Taf Samaches in Hilchos Pesach, where the Mechaber quotes that. The two reasons, as we said, the nafkaminas would be if by minig there's a deraisa or not, or if the tzibur is moichel. But no doubt about it, a person should not change even in standing versus sitting. That's ayishana, even in those type of inyanim. Wearing a bacha, an unmarried bacha to wear talis gadol, there's no problem of leiskodu or minig, as we said. Rabbeinu tam tefillin today, certainly there's no problem, unless someone wears it during Shemon Esrei of Shachos, he's making a very pronounced statement, that's leisus goydu perhaps. Chol hamoed, tefillin minhagim should be kept, each should go to their own minyan, even if it's a tircha. We did see that if there's no other choice to combine, you could either combine, if need be, or daven behind the mechitza is probably a better eitzah. But again, since so many poskim said it's a deraisa, one should make every effort to avoid coming onto this kula. In Eretz Yisrael, manichet tefillin on Chol hamoed could only wear it petzina, they shouldn't make their own minyan. Nusach, you could follow your nusach as long as it's not obvious that you're changing. Keep it low key when there are differences. Most of davening is the same, but when it's different, don't broadcast that difference. You could daven as a shliach tzibur, you should daven everything like the Tzibur. Minhagim of Tachnun, your Gimel Midas, Burachim should be following the Tzibur. By standing or sitting, by Kaddish, Chodesh, or Kriyas HaTorah, there's a mile in standing, it's kavod. A mile in sitting, it's a more kavana. But you follow the Tzibur unless you know there's no kipeda. Saying tachnu when the tzibur doesn't, again, some shuls they don't mind, you do it. We don't say by mincha, you can do what you want, then do what you want. But if there's a kipeda, not to say on the tachnu of a yard site, one should not daven there or daven elsewhere, or daven in a different room. The chumras, the Pesach, there's definitely no leisis goydadu or al yeshanam. Hallel Pesach, daven in a shul that does your minhag, otherwise you have to follow the tzibur al kapan without a bracha. Sefira-related and Tzibur, there is leisis goydadu because at least a minhag shall issur. Sukkah, minhagim, as we said today in today's anigayit, so much more. Nanum is only a minhag, and 2 days Yom Kippur highlights the importance of leisis goydadu.
I went over to Moshe Peak and I told them